exhausted after watching that.
I didn't know you did Spice.
What's that?
I didn't know you did Spice. It's a measure of how many films you've done. I was looking at those movies thinking, you did that, you did that, you did that.
Yeah, it's 800 movies, I think, since 1988. When K&B started, I actually started in Pittsburgh with George Romero, the brilliant George Romero, in 1984. So it's been almost 30 years.
Now we're going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we have a special guest to make a presentation. Growing up, did you know you were destined to become a horror icon or a horror legend?
You know, it's funny, I emailed Frank Darabont, and I said, hey, I'm going to London, and I'm getting an award, and this is exciting, and he said, oh, so you're really old, aren't you? He said, you're a legend, then you're old. I'm like, wait a second. You know, I grew up in Pittsburgh, probably 20 minutes away from the cemetery where they shot Night of the Living Dead. And I found myself watching Super 8 movies of all the classic horror stuff, and Chiller Theater, which was the local TV affiliate, and I just loved it. You know, it was a hobby. Like so many people that I've met outside, and a lot of people, you start doing this as a hobby. You never imagine when you're 10, 11, 12 years old that it's going to become your career. You just think, oh, this is something I love, and I want to invest in it. So for me, it was Jaws, Dawn of the Dead, War of the Worlds, The Time Machine, you know, the originals, of course. So it was something that just sparked my imagination. And in Pittsburgh, there were two people you needed to meet in order to get into the movie business. One was George Romero and one was Tom Savini. So I happened to become friends with George. And next thing I knew, I was friends with Tom. And when Day of the Dead came up, they just called and said, hey, so we're doing Day of the Dead. Do you want a job? And I'm like, hold that thought. I'll be right back. And literally rushed home. I think I got a speeding ticket on my way home to inform my parents that I was going to take a slight detour from my pre-med career. I kind of, which is true. I figured the fake blood would be more rewarding than the real blood. So ironically, it was almost as simple as that.
So did you have any experience in this field at all?
I didn't. You know what I mean? I had sculpted when I was younger, and I drew. I took art classes when I was in high school and even in college a little bit. But I never imagined that it would become this. I mean, I'm such a fan of the genre, and I love it that if I wasn't sitting here, I would be sitting probably in that guy's seat right there. So it's rewarding for me, and you know, coming up on 28 years. I think what keeps it fresh and what keeps it exciting for me is I'm watching these shows as a fan. You know, when I watch The Walking Dead, I watch it, I put on the screen what I would want to see because I love the genre so much, and that gives me the ability to keep it fresh, and I think that's why people keep watching.
You mentioned certain key films as being very influential in your life, like films like Jaws and The Original Thing. I mean, what do you think it is about those movies that influence so many other people as well?
Well, you know, what I love about special effects makeup, and this is something that I kind of just realized in the last couple of weeks, which is in the late 70s and early 80s when you had The Howling and American Werewolf in London and Dawn of the Dead and all that was sort of the heyday for makeup effects guys. We all had long hair, we all loved Van Halen, and you know, we were kind of thought we were really, really cool and trying to pick up girls, and sorry, Annie. That was this weird persona that came along with doing special effects makeup. But what I didn't realize is because the makeup effects were sort of pushed to the forefront of those movies, it attracted young filmmakers like Robert Rodriguez and Guillermo del Toro and Alex Aja and Eli Roth and Quentin and all those guys. Because what happened was a lot of those guys started out wanting to do makeup effects. And it's a huge compliment. And I feel like we're all sort of cut out of the same cloth, you know. I kind of joke around that somebody threw a big chunk of meat with a hook in it and threw it out into the water, and all of us grabbed onto it, and it's wherever we let go. This is where our career path took. And you know, you could talk to Sam Raimi or Frank Darabont, and we will all talk passionately about Ray Harryhausen and passionately about Hammer horror and all that kind of stuff, because we all love the genre. And some guys decided to do effects, and some guys became writers, and some guys became directors. But I really do believe that if it hadn't been for Ray Harryhausen, and it hadn't been for the fact that the Hammer horror movies were a little sexier and a little gorier, that sort of stoked the imagination of a lot of guys my age and younger.
But to take it back, Day of the Dead, that was your first movie, I believe, in terms of effects. What can you remember about the production, and particularly those two guys, Savini and George?
Well, you know, what was interesting for me on Day of the Dead was I sort of created this job description that didn't exist. I was like the assistant to Tom Savini, so I was his coordinator. The producers loved it because it allowed him to sort of step off and be free to design the effects, and I sort of coordinated the department. Okay, we need 18 zombies today, we need 20 tomorrow, and but you know, all of us were I mean, I was the oldest guy on the crew, aside from Tom Savini, and I was 20 years old. The youngest guy was Everett Barella, who was 18. So you had a bunch of guys between 18 and 20 who were geeking out every day that they were working on Day of the Dead. We'd be like, so what do you think, they'll make a sequel to Evil Dead? Oh, yeah, I don't know, maybe. But you think Ash will be in it? I mean, like, those were the conversations we would have. Or you'd sit there and you'd be like, okay, so if you could go back in time and work on Creature from the Black Lagoon, or King Kong, or This Island Earth, those were the conversations. It wasn't like, oh my God, did you see that chick? She's hot. We would talk about like what nerdy movie we could go back in time and work on. So you just, at that time in our lives, when we were young and impressionable, we just fed off that excitement. You know, there's a documentary that played earlier called Nightmare Factory, and I got approached by Donna Davies, the producer, director, and she said, you know, all this behind-the-scenes footage you guys shot, no one's ever seen it. So she actually took a lot of it and cut it together into a little sort of story about, you know, where I grew up and how I got into the business. And it's funny because it plays up that whole, like, moving to LA in the 80s and having long hair and all that goofy stuff. But what I was excited about was it really did capture that time in movie making, and the fact that every movie was trying to top the special effects of the movie before. And it certainly changed filmmaking, because back then, the movies were about the effects. Now I make a very conscious effort to make sure that the effects are and especially on Walking Dead, now that I have an opportunity to be involved creatively, you can't stop the movie to showcase the special effect, which is fine, but it really has to serve the story, and that's something that is very, very important.
Well, you plugged into the horror network pretty damn quickly. Was that because, you know, you knew who to target, or did people come to you?
You know, we've been doing it a long time, and we get a lot of, fortunately, we get a lot of great repeat business. You know, I mean, we've done all of Quentin's movies. I mean, I still have one of the ears from Reservoir Dogs. And the deal was, he said, listen, we're doing this little movie. Originally, it was going to be like $35,000, and Quentin and his friends were all going to star in it. And then Lawrence Bender gave the script to Harvey Keitel, and then it became a little over $1 million. But I think we made $800, $1,000. We didn't make any money on it. It was just, you know, hey, can you help us out? We need an ear, and we need some blood. I'm like, okay, sure. And who would have ever known? You know? So a lot of times when we get calls from people saying, hey, I got this little movie, you know, I always remember. I'll never forget seeing Reservoir Dogs for the first time and calling Quentin and saying, that's why I moved out here, to be able to work on a film like that just had such a vision. And you know, one of the things that I love about my job is I continue to learn every day. When we wrapped the season 2 of Walking Dead last year, I literally went directly onto Django. It was like I left set, and like within 2 weeks I was shooting Django Unchained. And the exciting part was learning about directing. I had directed on Walking Dead, so I was able to step back and go, okay, I can't go up to a director and say, okay, we're shooting this scene in 6 months, and a guy gets his arm chopped off, so which arm is it, and where does he get chopped off? And I was able to step back and design the effects from a director's standpoint, and by doing so, it allowed the director the freedom to shoot the scene the way he wanted to. And it was a great part of learning what I do. And when people come up and say, I want to do special effects and I want to learn how to do this and learn how to do that, you know, the number one key thing that you have to be able to do is be creative on set and allow the director to be, to let things grow organically when your actors come in and the way it works.